I'm here at Offshore Europe 2015 with Charles Woodburn, who's the Chief Executive of Expro. Charles, thank you very much for your time. I know it's very busy, few hours already for you at the start of this. I mean, we're here at Offshore Europe. The past year has been a fairly turbulent one for the industry as a whole. I mean, what effects do you think it's had on innovation and technology?
Well, always in a downturn, it's a challenging environment for innovation and technology because you're having to balance the varying demands of the business. Certainly our priority, and I speak for Expro here, is to try and make sure that the key projects, continue as promised. I mean, we have time frames that we have to deliver on these projects, and client expectations for those projects. So we have to keep them moving as best we can. But notwithstanding, there are challenges, and in an environment such as this, the nice to have projects or things that in a better environment that you might be working on will unfortunately not make the cut. So it's a question of prioritizing around what you really need to do as a business.
How does your technical programme cope with the current state of affair in the oil and gas industry?
I think the question really was about the technical programmes with respect to offshore Europe, and I should add that in my capacity here, I'm here wearing two hats. One as a CEO of Expro, of course, but also as technical chair for offshore Europe. And I think we created the technical programme for offshore Europe. Obviously when times were quite different. But having said that, the technical program tries to cover the full spectrum, from upstream all the way through the life of a well, and therefore, obviously you get different priorities at different points in the cycle. But it's still a very relevant technical program, and one of the things that we added, of course, was a little bit more emphasis on the people side to reflect the theme of this year's conference, which is Inspire the Next Generation, which was a theme that we decided on about a year and a half ago.
That's such an important theme, isn't it, to encourage the young next generation into the oil and gas industry? How does the programme inspire that?
It certainly is, and having just done the panel session, I explained a little bit, certainly one of the personal experiences I had with respect to motivating me to propose this as a theme, alongside the other panel, my co-chair, and that was really at Offshore Europe 2 years ago when I had done my usual walk around and came out of it thinking, frankly, this is an amazing place, great technology, great people. It's an exciting place to walk around. It is every year, and my nephew lives here in Aberdeen, and I called up my sister and said, why don't you bring him over and let him have a look around. I think he'll find this really exciting. And he must have been about 14 at the time, and so she came over, got in the car, drove over, but when she got to the door, she couldn't get him in because he was under 16. And we realised that in fact, for kids of that age, and it's an important age group for kids because they're really starting to make choices about their careers and so on and so forth, whether they're going to go engineering, what kind of engineering they might want to do, if it's physics or or sciences. It's an important time, and we've got this great opportunity of a conference here, and we were somewhat, not through deliberately excluding, but just, as I say, it was a blind spot that we were not involving that group, and so as a result of that, we have extended what Offshore Europe does, and through the Inspire programme this year to try and make sure that we address that younger age group, and we have a schools program where you've got two groups of schools coming through. The first group are in the 14 to 15 age group, and then the next is in the last couple of years of school, and they're coming through, and we've organised it so they get to meet new graduates that are in the industry. And have a walk around and hopefully get inspired by the technology that we have here, and that they go back to their schools and talk to their friends about it, and it starts to get more people talking about all the good things that we do as an industry.
As well as getting the younger generation interested in oil and gas, Charles, obviously innovation is a key factor in driving the industry forward into the future. What excites you going forward? What innovations excite you in oil and gas at the moment?
Yeah, there's a huge range of technologies that's still to be developed. I mean, yes, we're in difficult times at the moment for commodity prices, but I think there's no shortage of oil and gas out there, and it's a question of developing it as efficiently, as socially responsibly as we possibly can. And I think technology is the answer for that. There's an awful lot we can do as an industry. Be it the obvious things of taking a lot of the processing that's currently done at surface, putting that down at the seabed so that you have very limited footprint. It's more efficient, in time, more cost effective. All of these things that we are going to need to develop. and that a place like the North Sea, which is an offshore basin, is going to need to remain competitive in years to come.
It's obviously a dedicated deep water zone here at the Offshore Europe, Charles. I mean, what equipment's having the greatest effect on this sector, do you think, and where is more work needed to ensure that it keeps going forward?
I think there's a lot of technology coming on the deep water side, and as I've said already, things like the subsea processing, the more and more measurements, more sophisticated technology at the seabed is really going to start to drive efficiencies. And of course, the other topic right now is, how do we reduce costs? How do we lower the economic thresholds for these? And I think, a number of those technologies, be it standardization, of the subsea infrastructure, are things that we can do to make sure that we keep the subsea infrastructure, or keep the subsea wells cost effective in the current climate.
What advice would you give to smaller innovators trying to attract the attention of the big players in the industry?
It's a difficult challenge always. I mean, I've both through my experience in Schlumberger and Expro. I mean, a lot of what we do is through smaller suppliers. We often see ourselves as sort of integrators of a lot of technology and measurements and pieces that are created either here and around Aberdeen or elsewhere. And I think obviously what you're looking for as a buyer of that technology is something that's unique. Something that's cost effective. I mean, something that helps us, as an integrated system, to sell, a project to our clients that, that meets their requirements. And I think a place like Offshore Europe is a great place for that. And there's, this, not just the sort of the panel sessions but the networking opportunities that you have at a conference like this is second to none. And I think one of the great things again about this conference is it's basically free entry, so you can get a lot of people come in, and always you end up meeting people. And just as we walk around, we see, I see things that I think, oh, that's quite interesting. I hadn't seen that before, or could that be useful? And a lot of follow-up goes on because of that.
What do you see as the priority going forward for the European offshore industry, Charles?
Probably for the European offshore industry is to, I think there's many things to say, but I think, and building a little bit on the theme of our panel discussion this morning, it's telling the story, explaining how relevant we are, longer term, and I think that, as I said this morning, I think that often we're not on the front foot of telling that story. Not just what we do for improving standard of living, the energy supply, all of the things that, frankly, most people take for granted. We're an important part of that. But also, the shift from coal to oil to gas. We're a big part of cleaner energy. And I think in the context of renewables, I think we need to be on the front foot of explaining our position there to, young people, but also governments, regulators, and so on and so forth.
And what outcomes are you hoping for, both personally, Charles, and for Expro as a company?
Well, obviously for Expro as a company, we've got an awful lot that we have to do. Fortunately, a lot of the big development projects that we're working on are continuing even at these depressed oil prices, so we have to deliver on those, make sure that we continue to exceed our customers' expectations. All the good things that you'd expect us to be doing. But I think, also make sure that we've got a strong pipeline going forward of, both opportunities, but also, people and graduates and apprenticeships to do this. And again, it's a topic that we touched on this morning, but I strongly believe that even when times are tough like now, that you can modulate your recruiting needs as you obviously do, but it's very hard to stop them completely, because then you end up in a gap in your skills base that hurts you for years to come. And I think that's certainly what we're trying to do, is make sure that we take a longer term view whilst recognising that we have to adapt to the current challenging market conditions.
Just finally, Charles, how do you get that message across to the younger generation, perhaps young graduates coming here, that you can have a long career, perhaps a whole working career in the oil and gas industry? Again,
a difficult question, and one that we tried to somewhat address in the panel session this morning. A lot of it is, as Brian Cox himself said, it's telling the story, and it's not just putting it in numbers and figures and saying that by 2040 half the world's energy will still be oil and gas. That's fine, and I think few people will dispute that. But that's not exciting for people or for youngsters to see. And I think it's, how do we craft this? Both the technology that's needed, the longevity of the business. How do we craft that into a story that appeals to the values of young people? And I don't have all the answers for that, but I think certainly this morning we certainly scratched the surface, I would say, on how we can tackle that challenge.
Charles, thank you very much for your time. Thank you.